communities, again, for decades. He has done work at the local level and also nationally, and has great wisdom to share with us today about his experience with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation as a trustee. Next, I will introduce Lejeune Montgomery Tabron, who is the first woman and the first Black person to serve as president and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Lejeune has incredible commitment to racial healing, and her rise to the presidency of one of the largest foundations really made history. She has led boldly. She has been a model for our field of the intentional centering of comprehensive, holistic, and sustainable change to address the effects of racism in our country. We have so much to learn from Lejeune. This year marks the 5th anniversary of the launch of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Initiative. And to mark this occasion and share their vision for transformation in community, we will hear their experiences and their leadership today. So I bring you Lejeune Montgomery Tabron and Ramon Murguia.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is Ramon, obviously, and I am pleased to have with me today Lejeune Montgomery Tabron, as you just heard, a fantastic leader in the world of philanthropy in this country and internationally. Lejeune has made us proud as President and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I don't know, Lejeune, if you want to say anything?
I want to say hello to everyone at the HIP conference. It's so nice to be here virtually, and I'm so happy that I'm here with Ramon, because Ramon is a great partner, and I think together we can pull this off. So I'm just happy to be a part of your conference.
As am I, and muchas gracias por la invitación and the opportunity to address you folks from a W.K. Kellogg Foundation perspective. And we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to get the conversation started. I have a question to get the conversation going with Lejeune, and so I will start by asking Lejeune, since she has been at the foundation for 34 years and really has firsthand experience in its growth to achieve racial equity and understanding the importance of healing. I remember back in 2007 when we actually launched this effort formally, and what a great day that was for us as a foundation to really get a start on racial equity, racial healing. But please share, Lejeune, at a high level, the Kellogg Foundation's approach to racial equity and healing, and how it is a core value for the foundation these days.
Thank you, Ramon. And as Ramon said, this has been a journey, and I want to be sure to just acknowledge that this is a journey, and it's not easy work. But our journey at the Kellogg Foundation has been long and steadfast. As Ramon mentioned, we've been doing this work for many decades, really as long as I've been at the foundation, which is 34 years now. And we've been doing it because it's part of our core value. It's something that we inherited from our founder, Will Keith Kellogg, who spoke of anti-racist and anti-racism as he was forming the Kellogg Foundation. So as we've come along on this journey, we call racial equity part of our DNA. It's not a slogan for us. It's a part of who we are, and it's embedded in everything we do. Will Keith left for us that we needed to focus on racial equity, we needed to focus on community engagement, and we needed to focus on leadership. And those are the three elements of our DNA. And as I said, you'll see this work in everything we do. But we've learned over this journey, right? We didn't get it all right at the very beginning. But as we've taken this journey, we've worked hard to make sure that our racial equity work was very inclusive and expansive. It's not about black, white, and it's not about the moment of George Floyd, but it's been more of a very intense work that we've just committed ourselves to. And I want to share our racial equity definition because I think it's important. We've been on this journey long enough to know that definitions matter. And for us, when we talk about racial equity, we talk about all people of color. And our goal is that every person, regardless of race, ethnicity, skin color, can see themselves with an abundance of opportunities to thrive. And no one feels that they're hampered by uh, physical traits in their pursuit for their opportunities. And we also know that to achieve racial equity, you have to focus on racial healing. And again, racial healing to us is very important work, and it's about the transformative nature of how we see one another and how we bring people together and allow them space for truth telling, for telling their stories, talking about their journey, and then talking about a common space where community members can come together and transform their circumstances. So our racial equity work is very intense, but we say healing is at the heart of racial equity, and we don't believe that you can get to racial equity without doing the healing work.
Well, that's great. And I really appreciate you sharing that definition of what we call racial equity and racial healing, because I think it sometimes is misdefined. And we know that the work is broad. Our approach to this issue has never been to exclude folks who have been discriminated against, but to make sure that when we focus on vulnerable children, we're focusing on all of them and really trying to create those ways that we can help them achieve better lives. So I know we're at the HIP conference, Lejeune, and I think you have insight. We talk about this all the time in our board meetings about how our work is landing on the ground. And I think it's important for us to kind of describe to this group today what it means for Latinos, what the W.K. Kellogg Foundation is doing. I think they'd like to know that the foundation is creating more opportunities for and investing in Latino-led organizations. So I hope you can share a little more about these and questions and how it's part of the foundation's commitment to racial equity and racial healing to address issues in the Latino community as well as others.
Absolutely, Ramon. And one thing that we've committed to is tracking this data. So we know very specifically how we're progressing. And again, we don't believe that we have reached perfect balance in this regard, but I can tell you that our commitment to Latino communities around the nation and internationally is constantly growing. And for the past 10 years or so, we've committed over $204 million to Latino organizations, over 300 grantees that are Latino-led. And when we track, we want to make sure that the resources are going into Latino communities and we're supporting Latino-led organizations. And I just picked something that we've done recently that I'm really proud of. And I want to start out first by saying our relationship with HIP has been a strong, strong relationship. And part of it was deeply going into that space of Latino giving and collective giving. And we supported HIP in its pursuit of bringing together Latino philanthropists. And we've continued this work to grow philanthropy in Latino communities so that they have the decision-making power to direct where these resources are going, not just receive grants, but to control the grants and the outcomes. And we just made a recent investment, and this is a newer organization, which I was very happy to support, but it's called Philanthropy Together. And this is led by a Latina. Her name is Sarah Lomlin. I don't know if Sarah is there, but this work is about building Latino giving circles and supporting organizations and communities so that they have the power to improve their own communities. But But overall, our commitment to the Latino organizations has just been strong, and we've seen through COVID the impact on your communities, and it has been disparate in that regard. And we know that Latino organizations and people were hit heavy, and we have to continue to support communities as they rebuild and make sure that they are in the decision making part of what that looks like for their communities. So we know there's much more work to do here, but we're committed to this journey, and it's an important part of our portfolio.
Well, I appreciate that response, Lejeune. I know that we work on this and we take it to heart that we're trying to invest money and funds in communities that are suffering. And so especially in the age of COVID, we've tried to redouble our efforts to make sure that the money's spent equally in all these important communities that we are trying to help.
So Ramon, I know your commitment is very strong, and I just look at your leadership in this space with awe because you're steadfast, you're committed, and you've helped our foundation become the foundation that it is. And in that regard, I want you to share a little bit about how you've been so instrumental in setting the values for our foundation and leading the way and helping us make sure that the work aligns around our racial equity work, our healing work, and all of the different areas of our portfolio. So from a board member's perspective, and particularly from a leadership position on the board, what is your perspective on this journey that we've been on?
Well, it's been an interesting journey, and I would first start by saying we've had it's really been a team effort. So you try and call me out. I know that I play a role, but I think we as a foundation have taken this work on together, and that's why we've tried to make a difference. But for the most part, I think you know, since you had such a long tenure at the foundation, that the work really started many years ago. The board had primarily been composed of white males for many years until the 80s when the issue of diversity was brought up, and it was first addressed by adding gender females to the board. And so I think we understand the importance of diversity and how bringing different perspectives can improve outcomes for an organization like ours. But it's quickly expanded to include other ethnicities and other issues such as geography and life experiences. I know I think one of the final pieces because I was the first Latino added to the board back in 2007. And at that time, coincidentally, we were talking about our racial equity journey and launched into this work by declaring ourselves to be an anti-racist organization. And it wasn't just to do that for publicity, but because it was essential to us achieving our mission. And really, we understood how we must dismantle these systems, racist systems that keep children from thriving and from succeeding. So, and I want to also say that it was more than just creating an authorized environment. It wasn't just about you all as staff doing the work. The board really jumped into this work as much as anybody else. We participated in these workshops and retreats. I remember the White Men as Full Diversity Partners retreat. I know been to a couple of the racial healing circles, the work where we launched a few years ago, and 5 years ago, I think it was, in California. I actually participated in those healing circles, and the emotions that are expressed, the real healing that occurs, even amongst these small groups, is so impressive and helps me as a board member understand what this work is about and how important it is to spread it across the country. So as a board member, I think I also understand and appreciate what Mr. Kellogg taught us from his initial learnings in this field of philanthropy. And we are a little bit different as a foundation, as you know, Lejeune. The Kellogg Foundation's approach really values the community and having people in those communities tell us what they need. as opposed to us going in and telling them what they should be doing. We seek to better represent and understand those communities that we serve and incorporate the best and most relevant science-based approaches and investigations, interventions. I think I'm proud that we listen to learn the community's priorities, to work alongside them, to create community-based initiatives and solutions. And because I think I know that we are most successful when we include and respect the authentic perspectives and voices of the communities with which we work and serve. I always like to quote Dr. Cornel West's talk about this, where he talked about if you want to save the people, you have to serve the people. If you want to lead the people, you have to love the people. And I think our work really reflects this perspective of valuing community voice, because in the end, that's how we're going to improve outcomes for those vulnerable children and families that Mr. Kellogg asked us to help improve.
Absolutely. That's great.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm so glad that you mentioned the internal work that it takes to really do this work with authenticity. We say it's an inside outside body of work. You can't do it in community if you haven't done the work and the hard work yourself. And these healing circles, people think that's the fluff part of the work, but it's actually where the real work happens, where we come together as people, we learn each other's stories, and we build a common pathway forward.
So I know we have just a few minutes left. There are a few more questions I wanted to get out there for you, Lejeune, to share with the group today. But I know a critical factor to our success is having a staff who are really champions for racial equity as well. We have a board policy that monitors racial equity of our staff. With your leadership, we have a staff that is committed to our values and have access to the tools and resources they need to make this work possible. So Lejeune, I would ask you to speak to the commitment of our staff and how you create an environment that is centered on racial equity and healing at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
Thanks, Ramon. And again, I want to say what you measure matters. And we measure this work. We measure our staff. We measure their commitment. As Ramon mentioned, we have gone on a personal learning journey. All of our staff receive significant training in this space. We've had leadership development training that is coupled with our racial equity training. We have what we call DNA learning sessions where on a quarterly basis, our entire staff comes together to talk about racial equity and how it shows up in our work. So our commitment to learning is deep. And as Ramon mentioned, our trustees participate in all of this training. This isn't something that we talk about as, the work. It is our work, and we do this together. As we've built our staff, we also look at the numbers. We want to make sure that we have representation across. And again, we're not perfect, but we're committed to it. And we look at where we are in all points in time. And I'm happy to announce that we have our first Latino Chief Investment Officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. This is huge for Carlos Rangel, and we are so proud to have him be our Chief Investment Officer. But more importantly, he is our Chief Investment Officer because we made sure way down in our hiring process that we make sure that every job search includes all people of color so that we can make sure that we are looking at the very best across all ethnicities. In addition to Carlos, on our leadership team, we actually have almost 20% of our leadership team being, again, Latino. And again, it's because we look at the numbers at every hire, and we want to make sure that we are representative. At the Kellogg Foundation, we have 47% people of color, and our board is actually 67% people of color. And that hasn't been achieved by accident. It's been intentional. It's been our commitment, and it's been our ability to embed the metrics into our organization so that we can make sure that we're being accountable to that commitment.
Well, I think you're right that it has been a team effort, and I really take my hat off to you, Lejeune, for the commitment you've brought to making sure that we are all represented at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and that our work matters for all these communities out there. We only have less than 5 minutes left now, so I'm going to cut to the end because I want to make sure you get a chance to just kind of sum up the experience we've had, racial healing and W.K. Kellogg Foundation. So before we go, I would like for you to offer to share some of your final thoughts. As people of color working in the philanthropic community, what are some of the things we can all do more of to help us achieve racial equity? I think that'd be a great final message for the HIP conference.
Well, great. Thank you. And we've learned a lot, and I would suggest that anyone interested in some of those learnings could go to our website. We have a publication called One Journey, which chronicles this work at the Kellogg Foundation over several decades. But some of the things I'd like to lift up as learnings, first of all, I want everyone to know that this is a journey that everyone can take, both individually as well as collectively as an organization. It does take commitment and fortitude, but it's well worth the journey. And what we know is that if you get into this space and you go deep into understanding people and creating that space for sharing stories and learnings, the benefits are just overwhelmingly rewarding as it relates to alignment within your organization. And that's one thing that I would say is key. There must be alignment in this space. And as Ramon mentioned, it starts with the board. And when he talks about the board setting that authorizing environment, boy, what a difference that makes as it relates to how you can bring others in the organization along on this journey and keep them there and sustain their interest and their commitment in this space. I also want to say as we close that we talk a lot these days about solidarity. And one thing I've learned is that it takes all of us. All of us are going to have to stay on this journey and be connected and uplift one another if we are going to achieve racial equity in our nation. So I'm just so proud to be in a space where we bring people together from all ethnicities, and our work in our TRHT work, our SCORE work is about bringing humans together of various backgrounds with multitudes of stories, but connecting them and building relationships where we know we all get there together and we're strengthened by one another. So solidarity, I think, is the key for all of us to achieve the racial equity and the opportunities necessary for young children and families to thrive as we move forward.
Couldn't agree with you more, Lejeune. I really appreciate all the work you've brought to this field. I guess, is there time for questions, or we're at the end, I guess? Thank you very much, Lejeune, for sharing your time and your insights. Appreciate everybody at the HIP conference.
Sorry we couldn't be there. We look forward to being there next year.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.